So as you can see, the sermon is entitled The Gospel According to Your Garden. Here, on these foothills at sunset, we cultivate hope. I'm going to tell you about these words, but first, could we just say them together, because I really love them. Here on these foothills at sunset, we cultivate hope. The first time that I heard these words by beloved Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, I was standing in a small patio garden in the far corner of the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. The Jenin refugee camp, a place where since 1953, Palestinians have waited and waited with hearts full of dreams of freedom and a land of their own. Samira, an elderly Palestinian grandmother, was introducing me to her garden of small clay pots, bursting with wild garlic, cherry tomatoes, beans, basil, mint, and mulukia, a beloved Middle Eastern green cooked similar to spinach. Samira's husband, Abdel, thrust a book of Palestinian poetry into my hands, which I could not read because it was in Arabic. Abdel told me that the book was Mahmoud Darwish's book of poetry, State of Siege, and he began translating from Arabic to English. Here, where the hills slope before the sunset and the chasm of time, near ripped-up gardens, stripped of their shadows, we do what prisoners do. We do what the jobless do. We cultivate hope. We cultivate hope, repeats Samira, who then gestures to her garden and says quietly, when everything outside is too much, when the cruelty and the absence of freedom becomes too much, I come to my garden. I press my fingertips into the earth until I can feel the soil enveloping my fingers like a dark, black cocoon of loving rejuvenation. I breathe the richness of the earth and let it sow within me the seeds of hope. I was reminded of Samira and Abdel this week as I repotted some succulents in my own patio garden of small clay pots. I was reminded that squatting on a cement backyard patio, or standing in the garden, kneeling in the grass if our knees let us do that, or as I know some of us do, sitting on the seat of our walker and working the earth, the flowers, vegetables, and plants. Doing this can root us in something larger than our own life, can root us in something more substantial than the commotion of emotion that threatens to engulf us, the commotion of emotion in our own heads and hearts, the commotion of emotion in the news and in the world at large. A backyard garden, a simple tomato plant in a pot, or a kitchen counter peace lily can pull us out into a broader experience of life. It can expand our perception. I'm wondering if any of us here in the garden or in the kitchen with a flowering pot, has anybody had that experience of something green and beautiful and growing, pulling us out of our commotion of emotion, connecting us to something larger, something bigger? Anybody relate to that? And I know there's so many master gardeners who are part of this congregation who know that experience and can do it with a touch of elegance as well. One of the things I love about our Unitarian Universalist faith is that a sacred connection to the natural world is a centerpiece of this religion. It's at its core. Unitarian Universalists believe that all life is interconnected and part of a greater oneness, a sacred unity. What Unitarian Universalist Ralph Waldo Emerson called the soul of the whole. Could you say that with me? The soul of the whole. Our Unitarian Universalist values acknowledge the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. El tejido interdependiente de todo lo existente, del cual somos una parte. Unitarian Universalism grows out of our ability to have a direct experience of the transcendent mystery and wonder which awakens us to the forces that create and uphold life. It's not dependent on the gospel according to someone else. It is honoring the gospel according to your own experience of the sacred and the mysterious. Becoming intimate with the earth reminds us that there is a greater power at work in our lives. There's a greater power at work in the universe. There's something beyond our attempts to control and influence everything. We call it God, Goddess, Fuente de Amor, Spirit of Life, Eternal Source. Call it the natural laws of science, call it the mystery of nature, or give it no name at all, which sometimes feels like the safest bet of all. Don't name it, but just experience it. But know that there are greater forces at work in our lives than we can perceive and define. There is something beyond the purely rational. But know this, that even as the garden expands us beyond ourselves, it also pulls us deeply into our own inner core. The beloved poet Stanley Kunitz nurtured his own masterpiece of a garden in Provincetown, Massachusetts, until his death at age 101. And let me tell you, he died still picking weeds in that garden and was happy to be doing it. Before he died, he wrote, "I think of gardening as an extension of one's own being, something deeply personal and intimate. What you plant in your garden reflects your own sensibility, your concept of beauty, your sense of form. Every true garden is an imaginative construct." I like that. Your garden, our garden, is an imaginative construct, something we create. Kunitz continues, "The garden is alive, and it's created to endure, just the way the human being comes into the world and lives, suffers, enjoys, and is mortal. The lifespan of a flowering plant can be so short, so abbreviated by the changing of the seasons. It seems to be a compressed parable of the human experience. Every cultivated plot of ground," says Stanley Kunitz, "is symbolic of the surprises and ramifications of life itself. The garden instructs us in a principle of life and death and renewal. Life, death, and don't forget the renewal. Gardening here in the Central Valley teaches this principle quickly, as I learned quickly 10 years ago when I arrived. Spring bursts forth deliciously with blossoms and greenery, the pale flowering of the peach trees, the rich redness of strawberry plants, the orange proclamation of the California poppy. Let's hear it for the California poppy. And one of my favorite, that bold lilac, purple, and pink of the crepe myrtle tree. Then, all of this too soon gives way to a harsh summer heat that works to wilt, brown, and burn the plant life. Increasingly more regularly, in the face of undeniable climate change, fire consumes the dry grass and drought-stressed trees of our Central Valley, the foothills, beyond into the Sierras. But remember, it doesn't end there with the fire and the destruction. The breathtaking splendor of autumn's red-orange Chinese pistache tree and the promise of a winter garden of tender lettuce, crisp leeks, and crunchy carrots wait to bring renewal once again. And this is important, renewal not just from the earth, but of the soul. As environmental activist Rachel Carson declared, there's something infinitely healing in the repeated refrains of nature, the assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. And I think we need to remember this assurance that the dawn comes after night. My late mother-in-law, Dorothy, who I wish you could have met because she was something else. She was a long-time and skilled gardener. Her garden left me speechless. I would just show up and do whatever she said to do in the garden and follow her lead. She was also an extraordinarily caring and skilled inner-city teacher who taught in some of Boston's toughest inner-city schools. She was somebody who taught but also watched some of her bright, life-filled students meet their deaths in the street with gunfire. Dorothy told me, coming home and going out into my suburban garden, digging my hands into the earth, grounds me and summons tranquility. No one is arguing. No one is making demands. No kids are making demands. And she would say, no one is shooting. No one is dying. For that hour in the garden, I know peace. I remember this conversation well. Dorothy paused and then added, because she was a Unitarian Universalist with a social conscience, she said, I think of my students back in the city, and I realize the garden source peace that I feel is an unearned privilege not available or accessible to everyone. For some, it's a privilege of our race and our accessibility to economic opportunities that are not available to all. We cultivate hope. We cultivate that cycle of life, death, and renewal. We cultivate the peace of green growing things, the peace of the dusky dirt, the peace of leaves changing through the seasons, the peace of hummingbird. And I love the hummingbird that comes to my patio, and the honeybee, what poet Wendell Berry called the peace of wild things. This is why green places and park spaces are essential to the mental and spiritual well-being of all. This is why green places and park spaces are desperately needed in Southwest Fresno. This is why we applaud last month's groundbreaking for Fresno's first public park named for Latina Dolores Huerta Park. It is Fresno's first park named for a Latina in the Southwest at Milburn and Dakota, and it will include shaded picnic areas and a dog park. In just 2 months, the first phase of Southwest Fresno's 10-acre Les Kimber Park will open, named for the second black person to serve on Fresno's City Council and someone who was so instrumental in creating the Martin Luther King Day Parade in downtown Fresno. And some of us know, because we were there just 2 days ago, on Friday, the Tower District's first ever public park and green space opened, complete with inclusive swings for children with disabilities. All of this, the promise of the peace brought by green growing things, nature's natural cycles, and access to all of this for all. The Buddha talks about stilling the mind. The Hindu gurus talk about touching the inner light. Jesus of Nazareth, talks about a peace that passeth all understanding. But I can say that direct contact with a seed slowly sprouting, the blossom reaching skyward, the ivy creeping outward, or the stump decaying inward, awakens within the human heart a connection to something timeless, real, and, yes, religious in the purest sense of the word. Is it any wonder so many of the world's faith traditions use the image of a garden to represent the original source from which we all sprang? And thinking back to the beginning of the sermon, is this any wonder that poet Mahmoud Darwish, wanting to fortify his fellow Palestinians, used that image of a garden to represent endurance amidst uncertainty? Darwish wrote, "Here, on the slopes of hills, facing the dusk, close to the gardens of broken shadows, we do what prisoners do, we do what the jobless do, we cultivate hope." Also translated as we sow hope, also translated as we grow hope. May we in the days ahead find our own ways to cultivate hope. As actress Audrey Hepburn once exclaimed, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." And together, dear ones, we must continue to believe in tomorrow. May it be so. Blessed be. Que así sea. Bendito sea. Amen.